One of the important turning points of the antebellum was the cotton gin. Before the cotton gin, it took you 10 hours to produce a pound of cotton, and it had very little profit. The cotton gin was invented by a man named Eli Whitney. He grew up in Massachusetts. He continued his education at Yale University, but then in 1792 he moved down to Georgia, more specifically Savannah, in hopes to be a private tutor, but he ended up moving on to the plantation of Mrs. Nathaniel Greene. She showed him the need for the cotton gin, how we needed it because cotton was easily grown and easily stored, but it still had those seeds in it that needed to be removed, and it also required a lot of manual labor, especially slave labor at the time. So this was the plan for the cotton gin. It's what his prototype looked like. It's a primary source. And it shows how this would be the handle for it, and it would strain through here because that's what the cotton gin did, is it strained the seeds out of the cotton. And it looks more like this when it is, and you turn this handle. So it works like that, and the word gin is derived from the word engine. This made it able to do 50 pounds of cotton a day. This made cotton have a lot of profit, and it made America boom economically, and it really helped, but then farmers started to rip off the cotton gin so they didn't have to pay money. Cotton then became America's #1 export, and it helped the North and the South because it gave raw materials to the North to form textiles. One downside of cotton is it created the need for slave labor. Life as a slave was extremely torturous. You work 6 days a week, and then when the particular institution came along, it spread across the South, and then many states actually passed slave codes. So a slavery code, this is the primary source of District of Columbia's, but it was just a bunch of rules that slaves had to follow, and many states agreed on them, and if they did not follow, they were punished. So some of the rules included that slaves could not meet a white person unless the owner was present. They could not own a gun. They could not learn to read and write. And they could not meet together unless a white person was present. They could be gambled off. They could be raffled off. And they could be traded between each other as gifts. They were not allowed to be testimony if a white person was involved in the case, and their marriages were not counted as legal because they were not legal people. So, were slave codes morally ethical? This is a huge topic for debate at the time because the Southerners were like, yeah, this is our property. We are morally allowed to own them. The Northerners, on the other hand, such as abolitionists such as Harriet Tubman, saw it as not ethical. Harriet Tubman was born a slave, and then she escaped, and she helped others escape. So she believed that these were morally unethical because you were deeming someone unfit to be married or any other thing. Another huge turning point of the antebellum was ballot lining in the Kansas election. So at the beginning of America, everything was balanced. There was the difference between states and federal government and slave states versus free states, such as seen here. So when Kansas was about to be added to the Union, they had to decide whether it was a free or a slave state. So they decided that it was going to have a poll, and they were going to solve it on like a ballot. But then the ballots got lined by people from Missouri because David Archison led 1,700 men over, called Border Ruffians, and they came from Missouri and they marched to Kansas, and they just filled out the ballots for it to become a slave state. An interesting fact about Archison actually is he was president for one day only. So After this, Kansas became Bloody Kansas, or Bleeding Kansas, and war broke out. This happened in about 54, and then on January 29th of 1861, it became a free state, Kansas did, and this was a newspaper article showing that it was free and that it was not going to have slavery. Another huge turning point was Manifest Destiny. Manifest Destiny was America's way to say that they could expand west and no one could do anything about it. The term was popularized by a newspaper writer named John O'Sullivan. He defined it as the God-given right to expand west. Before Manifest Destiny, all the farmers and everybody was to the east of the Appalachian Mountains. But then they started to see the gold in California and other places, so they started to expand west. This is a primary source of Manifest Destiny, showing that the people were like pointing out west to the unknown, trying to go out there, and they were really crowded back here, but everyone was excited to go out west. This is really important today because it shows that we expanded coast to coast. We are no longer just east of the Appalachians. We are the United States of America. So Mexico and the United States had a very complicated relationship in the Antebellum. In 1821, Mexico, which at the time was Mexico and Texas, became independent. American settlers were offered to stay on Texas land as long as they became Catholic and Mexican. Then in 1829, Mexico outlawed slavery. Sorry, I have a piece of hair in my mouth. They outlawed slavery, while Texas did not. This created tension between the two. Well, Stephen Austin went down to Mexico to negotiate with the Santa Anna, the dictator, and he was thrown in jail, and this harshened the relationship even more between Mexico and Texas. War then broke out between the two places, and then in 1835, and then on March 2nd, 1836, Texas formally declared itself as an independent nation. 4 days later, Santa Anna completed a famous siege on Alamo Mission. The United States did not want to add another slave state to its midst, so they let Texas be a lone republic for 9 years. But then in May of 1846, the United States and Mexico were at war again. The war, which I will talk about later, was ended by the Guadalupe-Hidalgo Treaty. The United States received the Texan territory, New Mexico, and California while we only gave the Mexican government $15 million for it. The final turning point is civil disobedience. When war broke out, Polk led the people from Washington, D.C. He sent the American army of 60,000 volunteers who wanted to fight, but he also sent John Fremont and Stephen Kearny, and they were sent to California and New Mexico. Well, he also sent Zachary Taylor to go across the River Grande, and he sent Winifred Scott, who was sent to Mexico City to negotiate peace. Well, while all this happening, people back home, some people decided they didn't want to pay their taxes. This person was especially Henry David Thoreau. He did not pay his taxes because he was against the war, so he was sent to jail. In jail, he wrote Civil Disobedience, and this is an excerpt from it, saying that if I break the law, why should I have to do it? Because we're just letting the machine control us. And this is really what he believed in. And this really affected the people today because it is what they believe in. And many people actually, like all these things, it led up to the Civil War. And many people still talk about it today and they are still affected by it today.